I'm just grabbing the linkies.
Yep.
All right, just went to Twitch, so Twitch is good.
Mm-hmm.
A. And all right, now I just need the YouTube tweets. Takes a second for people to filter in anyway, so
Yeah. So most of the time, the Discord will pop in. Here they come.
okay. So before we do like a proper introduction, just for a little throwaway question while people come in, how did you end up getting down there to interview them? Like, how did you get into contact with them and manage getting this project together?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it on the shorter end. I'd been interested in going down to work with the Zapatistas for a long time, having first, started reading about the Zapatistas maybe back in 2015 or 2016. Had read up a little on the history and the theory and the ways in which this movement is, in a lot of ways, pretty unique and quite different from other, non-state liberatory movements. But I didn't have the chance to go down there. First, because the kind of deepening security problems there in the past 10 years or so, especially in the later 2010s, and during the COVID pandemic, the territories closed and people weren't allowed in for a long time. And so the 2024 anniversary event, the 30th anniversary of the Zapatista uprising, was the first public event they had held in maybe 5 years since before the pandemic. And it just so happened that I had recently joined the Modern Insurgent. They were interested in kind of expanding their documentary productions. And I was also talking with a Mexican photojournalist friend of mine who I met in a filmmaking program in Greece, who had covered the Zapatistas before. He had been down to Chiapas a bunch of times. So it was kind of serendipitous. We got the Modern Insurgent funding, and me and my buddy Pedro Wanza, a great Mexican photojournalist, went down there and we're able to cover.
So, by judging by that, I was going to ask if you had previous filmmaking experience, but like on that note, why don't you introduce yourself for people and kind of your background before we get into what this documentary is about?
Sure. Well, my name is Rowan Glass. I'm an anthropologist, filmmaker, journalist, currently in a folklore graduate program, so I wear a bunch of hats. And yeah, I had made a few kind of forays into filmmaking before this first, this major project with the Zapatistas, which is kind of my most kind of large-scale filmmaking project so far. But I started out as more in an anthropological and ethnographic vein. I'd been doing research with a couple of indigenous communities in Colombia for a couple of years. Didn't have a camera when I started going down there, but eventually picked up a camera, started taking videos. First just video interviews, but also filming things like protests. And then I found that enjoyable, and I found it a more meaningful way to kind of disseminate my research and connect with a general audience versus like academic papers, which nobody reads. Nobody reads research papers, but people do watch videos. And so I thought that branching into filmmaking would be a good way to kind of make my work a little more accessible to the general public. And from there, I started branching into journalism as well. And I did a project in Greece in 2023. That's where I met Pedro Wanza, who I would go on to work with in Mexico. And my first project for the Modern Insurgent was a documentary on desert blues in the Moroccan Sahara. And I had that video project under my belt already when I went down to Mexico, so it kind of made sense to just keep the ball rolling from there.
So why don't we get into who the Zapatistas are and what this documentary is about?
Sure. Well, the Zapatistas are a movement of indigenous rebels, often called anarchist or socialist or communist. None of these terms are totally applicable to the Zapatista case because much of their philosophy and much of their kind of political practice is rooted in indigenous cosmovisions, indigenous traditional forms of governance, of communal labor, things of that nature. And so they are drawing from kind of an international leftist body of theory, but at the same time, they're very rooted in local conditions and indigenous traditions of politics and so on. And in 1994, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, the armed insurgent wing of kind of a broader intellectual movement of Zapatismo, the ideology of the Zapatistas, launched an uprising against the Mexican state. So this is January 1st, New Year's 1994. Briefly occupied some of the major cities of Chiapas, which is Mexico's southernmost and poorest state, and also one of its most heavily indigenous states. And in 12 days of combat, they were pushed back by the Mexican army back into kind of the indigenous highlands, the hinterland of Chiapas. But there they were able to establish these bastions of indigenous autonomy. And for the past 30 plus years, it's now been more than 31 years since the uprising, the Zapatistas have been able to kind of cultivate this quite unique system of indigenous autonomy in the interior of Chiapas, and something like 500,000 people now live in the Zapatista territories.
Yeah.
So what is their relationship to the Mexican government now? How did that
That's literally what I was going to ask.
how does that sort of work now? How is that relation sitting now with autonomy? Because we know how states deal with autonomous groups.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because I'd say the relationship between the Zapatistas and the state has changed a lot since the mid 90s, the early days after the uprising, into the mid 2000s when there was kind of a rapprochement between the state and the Zapatistas, and prominent Zapatista figures, leaders like Subcomandante Marcos, most prominently were able to freely leave Chiapas and go on speaking tours throughout Mexico. And today, the situation has again maybe worsened a little because the state has failed to intervene in kind of the escalating narco presence and the drug war, which has come to Chiapas in the past 5 or 10 years or so. But there has been this evolution from 12 days of open combat, and in fact that was the only period of armed conflict between the Mexican state and the Zapatistas, was immediately after the uprising, from January 1st to January 12th or January 13th or so of 1994. There was combat, about 150 deaths, mostly rebels, and since then there was a ceasefire and various processes of attempted negotiations. There were a series of kind of like failed or non-implemented accords called the San Andres Accords in 1996, I believe. And the Zapatistas basically have refused to continue negotiating with the state because the state failed to follow through on the promises made in the San Andres Accords. And for a long time, the Zapatistas even refused any sort of participation in kind of like formal, legal, parliamentary, political processes. That changed with the presidential election in 2017, when the Zapatistas finally openly endorsed a presidential candidate for the first time. And they make appearances here and there, especially in indigenous indigenous political initiatives like the Congreso Nacional Indígena, the National Indigenous Congress. But they still have a pretty, I would say, distant relationship with the state, and they're openly critical of it.
Yeah. Okay. So was that AMLO that they endorsed? Who did they endorse?
They endorsed a Mexican indigenous woman named Marichoy, who we interview in the documentary. You'll see she's kind of our most high-profile interview, and we were quite lucky to be able to talk to her at the anniversary event. AMLO had a pretty bad relationship with the Zapatistas because
that's what I was going to ask about specifically.
Yeah, and the reason is AMLO has this kind of reputation, this self-presentation as this left-wing populist who has been good for like Mexican working class and so on. And in some ways, maybe that's true. At the same time, he was quite bad, at least from the Zapatistas perspective and that of other indigenous groups, on specifically indigenous issues. And a big part of that is because he was a developmentalist. He advocated and implemented things like the Tren Maya, the Maya train, which is
Yeah,
this
people who
massive
watch
development
any
project.
amount of us, this is a common rant I go on, is about how the Mexican government isn't as based as you think. Like, it's just populism.
Yeah, and he's very much in the vein of this, of like the pink tide populists, Evo Morales and um, Chavez and so on, who in general did not cultivate very close relationships with indigenous communities, who just, despite their working class, labor union background, like left wing populism type vibe, um, they often were not very good on indigenous issues, and that's why the Zapatistas never liked AMLO. And they don't like his successor, Scheinbaum, who was, basically handpicked by AMLO, and who continues many of his policies. Although I think she is better on the indigenous front and the environmental front than AMLO was.
Well, I think she's the environmental scientist, right? Isn't that what she did? Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's like an interesting fun fact about the Zapatistas is like their coffee industry. And I don't think people know this, but Alex Jones, I don't know if he still does, but he used to be a distributor of their coffee.
I didn't
His
even know that. That's
American
crazy.
brand, Alex Jones Coffee, is literally Zapatista coffee. I think it might have changed now. But yeah, there's
I
a
would
whole
keep it like that.
thing of him promoting it. It'd be like,
That's
people
crazy.
say they're communists, they're not communists. they're actually cool, they hate the government.
I mean, I doubt he really knows anything about the Zapatistas,
Yeah,
but I'm just
yeah, he's
shocked
just-
Yeah,
that.
I highly doubt it.
He's a snake oil salesman, you know?
Yeah,
It's
But
just
it's
funny
just
that
very
that
funny.
happened.
Him of all people. Because that's
I'm
the
kind of
whole
here
right
for
wing
it.
coffee grift, you know? He might
Yeah.
have been the first guy to do it.
And I mean, I see why the Zapatistas would be like, well, sure, if this right wing asshole's going to buy our coffee, like, we could take the money.
It's like I don't understand why people are so against this idea of like willingly taking money to use it against people. Like that's a great idea. Like why are you kneecapping yourself? That's great to hear that they do that.
Yeah, and the Zapatistas have always, I think, been pretty on the ball in terms of their commitment to uh, this kind of like strategic negotiation of their links and their connections to other actors internationally. I mean, I don't know that about Alex Jones, but they've always had a big kind of international support network in Europe and North America, throughout Latin America, and that's actually pretty soon I'll be embarking on another documentary project for Modern Insurgent covering indigenous territorial defenders in Colombia, and there's a lot of like parallels and connections between other indigenous autonomy movements elsewhere in Latin America. With the Zapatistas, they draw a lot of inspiration from them.
Okay. The what's it called? The During Gap. How
the
how
During
do
Gap.
the Zapatistas deal with the flow of migrants? Because I imagine it probably does go through
They're right on the
Chiapas.
border.
Well, this has become a major problem only in the past couple of years because with the advent of the Mexican drug war in Chiapas, which formerly and for many decades was one of Mexico's safest states, and it was pretty well insulated from the kind of narco violence that was widespread throughout much of central and northern Mexico. In the past couple of years, the two major cartels have arrived in Chiapas, and this has greatly worsened the security situation for the Zapatistas. But part of this is they're not just running drugs, they're smuggling migrants. There's a big human trafficking operation going on over the pretty porous Mexico-Guatemala border. And some of those new human trafficking routes are opening up through Zapatista territory. And so the Zapatistas...
How does the poverty of the region play a role in it?
Well, I would say many communities have gotten involved in the trade because they need the money, because there are limited kind of legal means to support themselves, and especially in these under-resourced, pretty remote indigenous communities that have always been poor. I mean, Chiapas has always been Mexico's poorest state. So in many cases, I think it's the only game in town, and they need the money. And unfortunately, as we've seen with coca growers in Colombia and elsewhere, ethics and morals are put aside um, when it's a matter of like, can you feed your family or not? And if the one thing that allows you to feed your family is growing cocaine or smuggling migrants, that's what you've got to do. And the Zapatistas, of course, are do not endorse or directly get involved in that trade, although plenty of accusations of that sort go around. But as far as I've been able to tell, talking to Zapatista allies, being in the territory, I don't think those accusations really hold any water. But they do have to kind of navigate this environment in which increasingly many of the communities around them are getting involved in, drug running, human trafficking, whatever it is.
So do they have an internal, like, is drug use a problem within the community, or is it like pretty on top of it, like they have programs in place to
Well, what about
help
instead of
people?
drug use, drug abuse
Yeah, drug
specifically?
abuse is probably a better term.
Because like
That's a
there's
good question.
peyote and stuff. Like Daisy just went down there had a peyote thing.
Yeah, peyote is not really traditionally used in this part of Mexico. That's more of a desert thing, and but in Chiapas they might use uh, morning glory seeds, which is another traditional, indigenous hallucinogen.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is a blanket ban in place in the Zapatista territories on any drug use, and this was made pretty clear in the series of communiques they put out, directed at foreigners and visitors ahead of the 30th anniversary celebrations. They said, this is not a party. Don't bring any drugs. And in fact, in the territories, there's a ban on alcohol, on drugs, and this is because historically, in the indigenous communities that are now part of the Zapatista territories, and still in many of the indigenous communities that surround them, there are kind of deep historical issues with rampant alcoholism and drug abuse, and they blame that on colonialism. I mean, to their mind, and this is something that many indigenous communities in North America and elsewhere have had to contend with as well. These substances have been introduced by colonizers in order to keep their communities weak and divided and fighting among themselves, rather than unified and strong. Yeah, I see Adrian's here. Hey man. Yeah, so there's the blanket ban on drug use in the Zapatista territories, and they were pretty keen on any of the outsiders at the 30th anniversary event not bringing any drugs.
Okay, and that honestly, that kind of tracks. I mean, it's and is that just in the area? It's like, hey, while you're here doing this, don't. And it's more of not a comment on the personal use, or is it like how does it actually work? I'm so curious.
I don't think it's really a commentary on like individual, lifestyle choices. It's definitely a communal policy, and like all decision making, essentially in Zapatista territories, this is something that's been decided on a collective level, and so it might actually vary depending on the municipality, depending on the community, because often these decisions do come down to whatever the local community decides. I mean, it's a direct democratic system, and but that might actually be a kind of universal policy in the territories. And I think a lot of that came out of the prominence of women's rights as one of the pillars of Zapatismo, because it was the women specifically in the early days of the revolution and in the kind of codification of all of these policies who said, we're sick of our husbands coming home drunk and beating us. And so I think that principle of keeping alcohol out of the communities has been pretty widely applied. Also, it's an issue of people doing drugs or involved in the circulation of drugs are often going to get involved with the cartels, and that becomes a security issue, especially with the rising power of the cartels and the extent to which they've been targeting these communities. So keeping drugs out of the communities is also a security issue in terms of not getting the cartels involved.
On this topic, I mean, you mentioned human smuggling and narcotic smuggling, but what about like arms smuggling and their view of arms? Because I know they disarmed a long time ago, but do they still got guns laying around just in case there's a call to arms or anything like that?
They do, and you'll see this in the documentary. Yeah, they never actually formally disarmed, although they don't take their arms out publicly anymore. And the reason is, again, it kind of comes back to the worsening security situation in Chiapas. They don't want to appear to be a threat to the cartels that are in fact targeting them anyway, but they know that they can't fight back because in military terms, they're much weaker than the cartels, they're much weaker than the state. So they're kind of in a bind when it comes to defending themselves with force, even though their communities are being targeted and attacked, and there's the occasional targeted assassination of Zapatista leaders and so on. They really can't take their guns out and put their foot down because they know that the retribution would, potentially destroy them. So it's quite a difficult situation in terms of their not really being able to use their arms, but they do have their arms, the same guns that they occupied San Cristobal with in 94. They have them sequestered in warehouses throughout the territory. But when you go to any of their public events, at least in the past 10 years or so, because I've seen footage from the early 2010s where guns are still visible, but any of their recent events, you see all these militants lined up with knives and with sticks. And sometimes the sticks are in the shape of guns and they're like doing military maneuvers with them. But the guns themselves don't really make public appearances anymore. In terms of arms smuggling, almost universally, all of the weapons illegally entering Mexico come from the U.S. Many of them are coming from many of them are like military grade weapons, and so you have to wonder like where these military weapons are coming from. I mean, evidently there's been cases of corruption by which actual military arms end up in the hands of cartels. But again, all of those
look at the Bay of Pig.
Yeah. Similar type of situation. But yeah, those guns don't arrive to the Zapatistas, and there probably is gun running throughout Chiapas because some of those guns that are entering from the U.S., then flow down into Central America, and that's how they're getting into South America. But they're not staying in Zapatista territories because the Zapatistas aren't involved in arms smuggling.
Mm-hmm.
And most of their arms that they do have were captured from raids on the Mexican army or police stations back in the 90s.
And they've been a little bit more, public, but also like international. Like they'll make statements on various international things, so they seem to be like less insular nowadays. Do you think that's just because of all the pressure going on around them?
I would say if you compare their public presence and their media prominence to where they were 30 or 20 years ago, they're actually much more insular. Because for the first 10 years of the revolution, they were very...
Rage Against the Machine was down there.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, everyone and their mother could go down and do an interview with Subcomandante Marcos for 10 or 15 years. And that's why you had people like Naomi Klein and even a couple of like right-wing personalities, media personalities went down there and like were with the Zapatistas. Some of them did interviews with Subcomandante Marcos. There was a 60 Minutes interview with Marcos. As you pointed out, Rage Against the Machine. All of these people could just go down there, hang out in Zapatista territory and, do interviews and all that. And that's just not the case anymore. Like I kind of opened this with, it had been maybe 5 years since there had been any public events until the 30th anniversary. And I just saw last week there was another big public Zapatista event. So they are reopening. They are kind of seemingly trying to get back to this earlier tradition of maintaining alliances and connections with international groups. Also, in the early 2020s, maybe 21 or 22, they launched what they called like a reverse invasion of Europe, where they sent a Zapatista delegation.
Yeah. They literally sent a boat.
Yeah, they sent a boat.
Funny.
And there's actually a great documentary done by a Mexican documentarian who was allowed to go with that expedition, who was on the boat. It's called La Montaña. And the level of access that I was able to get was much more than we were able to. because the situation was different. It was easier even a few years before we were there. But by the time we were there were no interviews. Like there was a blanket ban on any of the dozens of journalists who were at the anniversary event from talking or doing interviews with any of the Zapatistas who were there. So all of our interviews are with allies, with politicians, with people who have worked with the Zapatistas. But we weren't able to talk to anyone at the anniversary event itself who actually
Yeah,
is a Zapatista.
I've been trying for years unsuccessfully.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like I said, it used to be much easier. They used to do events, paid public events all the time. And they stopped doing that essentially, I think, because they realized, on the one hand, they became a little disillusioned with the lack of kind of materially meaningful support that they were not receiving from their international allies. So they had this like big ideological support network, people who kind of claimed to be behind the Zapatista project, but who in material terms really couldn't contribute much to the cause. And I think they were a little disillusioned by that experience, and that's why they withdrew, in addition to the security challenges.
So in the chat here, it says, what's your next project or something you'd like to report on?
My next project is I'm heading to Colombia in a couple of weeks, and got a couple of projects there. But the main one, which I'm also doing through Modern Insurgent, is a report on the Indigenous Guard, which is another indigenous self-defense, environmental, and in terms of like social rights, self-defense movement, which started among the Nasa, one of Colombia's largest indigenous populations, which has been in the fight since like the 70s. They were kind of the pioneers of this community defense model, which they called the Indigenous Guard. But this model has since spread throughout Colombia, and now you have every indigenous community essentially has its own Indigenous Guard organization. They're not formally connected. This isn't part of like one large organization, but it's kind of a model of community self-defense, which has spread really successfully throughout pretty much every indigenous community of Colombia. And it's even resulted in the appearance of what they call maroon guards, like Afro-descendant communities, guard models. And so we'll be doing an embed with one of the frontline Indigenous Guard units, one of the oldest ones, kind of in the heartland of the movement, which recently has had to contend with a lot of kind of targeted violence directed at them by, on the one hand, paramilitaries backed by the Colombian state, on the other, cartels and narco-traffickers. And there's also the left-wing guerrillas, the FARC dissidents and the ELN and groups like that. And so they're really under attack, under fire from all sides. And we'd like to shed some light on what's still a pretty underreported movement there.
So to wrap up, where would people go to see that or more of your work?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at rowan.glass. And most of my work is through the Modern Insurgent, moderninsurgent.org. And we also have a YouTube channel. You can watch the Zapatista documentary, all of our other great documentaries we have reported there, from Morocco, from Ireland, Italy, Ukraine, all over the place, and soon enough from Colombia as well. So check out Modern Insurgent, and if you want, you can follow me on Instagram.
Oh, Jack, you have anything that I didn't let you get in there?
I do want to ask one question. So, the Kurdish model is decentralized and sort of don't need to go into it. How similar is the Zapatista model to that? Is it decentralized? How decentralized? How does it work sort of in that aspect? Just a final question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Kurdish model going on in the autonomous administration in northern Syria. There's been, over the years, a lot of kind of comparisons and also contrasts between the Zapatista model and the Rojava model. I think in a lot of ways it's a good comparison. Both systems were kind of developed out of a historical experience of colonialism, whether the Mayas on the one hand or the Kurds on the other. Both were kind of the merger of indigenous social movements, grassroots, local traditions, and Marxist-Leninist, more traditional left-wing guerrilla type movements. but there's some important differences as well. But in terms of the comparison between how decentralized each model is, I think the Zapatistas have always advocated for direct democratic, decentralized form of kind of collective rule. Um, and of course, there's been a lot of comparisons to forms of anarchism, forms of libertarian socialism. Those labels are not totally inaccurate, but they do kind of miss the indigenous roots of the kind of autonomous governance
Yeah,
system.
they can just, it's not any of those things. It's Zapatismo.
Yeah, it's Zapatismo, and a more direct, a more like maybe relevant reference point within the Mexican
My
tradition would be.
chinchilla thinks I'm talking to him. His name is Zapata.
Oh yeah, that's a great name. Yeah. Well, a more direct ideological reference in Mexico would be Madonismo, which is Flores Magón was a Mexican anarchist who was kind of one of the main ideologues of the Mexican Revolution, inspired guys like Emiliano Zapata, um, and then obviously Zapata himself is a great ideological reference. So you have these local references, just like in the Syrian case, you have Apo Abdel Öcalan as the main reference point there. But I will say that the Zapatistas underwent a big kind of restructuring of their system of autonomy in late 2023, just before the 30th anniversary events.
They did
in
restructure,
which
didn't they?
They did, yeah. And there was a long series of communiques. It was like more than 20 different essays that they released over the course of a couple of months back in late 23. And one of them, I think it's the 9th part in this series of communiques, is called The New Structure of Zapatista Autonomy. And you'll find more details about the specifics of how they've restructured there. But the long and short of it is this was an attempt to increase the extent to which Zapatista governance is decentralized. So it had always been, in theory at least, and mostly in practice, I think, a pretty decentralized system in which you had, local neighborhood or village level councils, which would elect representatives to regional, inter-village level councils, and those would elect representatives up to the next level, municipal, and then up to the regional level. But the new restructured system of autonomy attempts to even further decentralize, and so now they have what they call like GALs, Gobiernos Autónomos Locales, so local autonomous governance, and it all starts again at kind of the village level. So if all is functioning as intended, I would say it's an example of a very decentralized system working well. The problem is like journalists and outsiders and researchers are just not really allowed access at this point because of the security situation. So it's a bit difficult to tell how well the system is being implemented on the ground.
It's funny because it's so much easier to go to Syria than into the Zapatista territory. You can just go to Syria; no one can stop you.
Yeah, and in terms of the ways in which these movements are different, I do think that's a key point. The fact that northern Syria simply was never as marginal geopolitically as Chiapas is. Chiapas, the Zapatista territories alone are like 500,000 inhabitants, but these are, there are no major cities. It's highly agrarian. The terrain is kind of very fragmented, very not a very well-developed infrastructure system there. Whereas northern Syria, the population of Rojava last I checked was close to 6 million. You do have large cities, you do have well-developed infrastructure, and it's a place where all of the neighboring powers want a piece of the pie. And so for that reason, I think the Zapatistas have the luxury perhaps of being a little more marginal, a little more able to prevent outsiders because they're from gaining access, simply because there isn't as much outside interest in the region to begin with, whereas the Kurds really don't, or I shouldn't say Kurds, the people of northeast Syria don't have that luxury. They don't really have a choice but to be relatively more open because their situation is so much more kind of central in terms of the geopolitics.
All right. I think we can end the interview there and start the documentary.
Yep.
So thanks for coming on to talk. If you have anything else to add, go ahead.
If you want us to plug anything, please send it into the private chat. I'll throw it in the chat
Cool. Well, I'll just plug it in, Modern Insurgent. You can check out the rest of our documentaries from all around the world on our website and on our YouTube channel. And yeah, thanks to you both for having me on, and I hope you enjoy the documentary.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much.
All right, enjoy.
Pleasure talking. Cool. Great. All right. Now,
Did you know I voted?
you voted.
It's just because I saw my microphone full screen.
Okay, I'm going to adjust us a little bit.
Not make us tiny in the corner. Are you gonna make
Yeah.
one? That's for a special.
Oh my god. No way.
You didn't know you could do that?
I could
that
freely
new?
move it.
Is that
Amazing.
new?
That's brand new, yeah.
Yeah, it's funnier because it's literally starting to mimic OBS, but it's just easier to use.
Yes. I am here for it. And there's no free move for the us though, of course. Because why would there be? Alrighty.
Oh, that takes up way too much frame.
Too much.
I'll fix it. Stop touching it.
On New Year's Day, 1994, the southern Mexican state of Chiapas woke to a spectacle. Masked and armed indigenous militants marched through the streets of its largest city, San Cristóbal de las Casas, declaring that a revolution had begun. Their message? Ya basta. Enough already. The indigenous peoples of Mexico, having suffered 500 years of colonial oppression, would suffer no more. The time for their liberation was at hand. By the break of dawn, the city hall had been occupied, land records destroyed, and prisoners freed. Elsewhere, an as yet unknown guerrilla leader calling himself Subcomandante Marcos seized the police station and distributed arms to his troops. As he explained to a pair of shocked tourists, "We are sorry for the inconvenience, but this is a revolution."
I'm just taking off our branding, so we're not double branding this, you know?
Yeah.
Oh no, I actually physically deleted it. That's not the one we're using though. I deleted another version of it. I hit X on it thinking it would take it off.
Hours later, knowing that state retribution would be swift, the rebels abandoned San Cristobal.
That's
Over the next-
saying I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We're in a revolution goes hard. That's great.
Yeah.
12 days
I mean-
until a ceasefire was declared.
How nice
His
of
dude
them.
is like literally a poet. So he's like pretty notorious for like being able to just say the perfect thing at the right time.
Yeah, we know, man. Like, we brought up like 3 in that interview? 4? maybe?
There were several, because at the end there was also all the different ones that he was talking about just in that region.
Like, we were literally talking about all the insurgent movements. Like, we were just specifically... This one is talking about the Zapatistas because we haven't spoken about it yet. We've wanted to. And we've also worked with Modern Insurgent before. They did this, and I contacted them and was like, hey, can you put us in contact with the guy who made the video so we can talk to him and watch this video and have a bit more context to it for people who don't know what the Zapatistas are. That's the whole point of us doing this right now. So, like, yes, we know that there are other insurgent movements other than EZLN, but this is just the one we're talking about today.
Battled the Mexican army across the rugged interior of Chiapas. When the smoke cleared and an unsteady truce was called, 145 men and women lay dead, most of them rebels. Though the insurgents had failed to seize lasting control over the urban areas of Chiapas, ostensibly the first step in an audacious plan to advance to Mexico City and seize the nation's capital, they had survived the military counterattack.
That was audacious.
They were now in a position to negotiate while constructing a system of radical autonomy in the remote and impoverished indigenous communities from which they launched their momentous uprising. The Zapatista Army of National Liberation, or EZLN, had made its debut, and they were here to stay.
Can we talk about how good Mexican music is?
Oh, I was hoping you were about to say the same thing I was, and I was going to talk about how good the voiceover is.
Oh, the voiceover is fantastic.
Like, it's probably one of the better ones that I've seen on YouTube in a while. Like, it's so well balanced. It's perfectly at the right loudness for YouTube. Like, and you know how much of a stickler I am when it comes to, like, audio editing.
Yep.
Sometimes, and that's the thing, is like, part of it is being able to have a controlled environment. So, when there's not chinchillas jumping off the walls in the background.
Alright, we'll have proper things soon enough.
The house I used to be at, I literally could
The
have
days
had
of
a
upheaval that
studio there if I wasn't sick.
Yeah.
would come to be known as the 1994 Zapatista uprising may have taken the white and mestizo elites of Mexico by surprise. But the Zapatista uprising was only the public unveiling of a movement years in the making. Behind it lies a history of 500 years of colonial dispossession in the largely Maya zones of the Chiapas hinterland, as well as a more recent history of left-wing insurgency in urban Mexico during the late 20th century. The Zapatista Army of National Liberation was the product of this revolutionary encounter. As the EZLN organized itself, setting up clandestine training camps in the jungles of Chiapas and assembling an arsenal, officials in the halls of power of Washington and Mexico City were hashing out the details of a comprehensive new neoliberal trade policy, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Combined with changes to the Mexican Constitution that dissolved communal land use traditions in favor of private ownership, NAFTA presented serious threats to the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, especially indigenous peasants in primarily agricultural states such as Chiapas. This was the context in which the EZLN began planning its public unveiling, culminating in the uprising of January 1st, 1994, the same day that NAFTA went into effect. Over the past 30 years, the Zapatistas have become known internationally for their unique system of indigenous autonomy, which outsiders have described as taking influences from anarchism and socialism, though the Zapatistas themselves reject these terms. Zapatista ideology is a syncretic mix of various influences and elements, drawing from both the indigenous cultures of Mexico and strands of radical leftism. They reject the state, capitalism, neoliberalism, and globalization, advocating instead for indigenous sovereignty, direct democracy, women's rights, the communalization of property, and autonomous systems of education, healthcare, law, and economic production. The success of their autonomous project has inspired
it's the opposition of NAFTA, which is like one of the, it is the globalist policy of this hemisphere. Right? Like, that's the whole point, is that globalism hurts these small supply chains. That's what happens. Big corporations come in, buy out all the farms.
Yep.
You know, and we still have this reputation where, like, people would like to think farmers are like these guys, but they're not.
No, they're big.
They're just corporate conglomerates with slave labor. I wonder how they feel about Trump.
Social movement.
I'm sure they... I'm not sure if you asked them what was their preference, what president in the U.S. they liked more. They probably have just about like equal opinion and disdain for all of them, and especially because Trump implemented that new NAFTA deal. You know, all of them have enforced NAFTA in a globalization effort. So when it comes to them as individuals, I would say that it's not much different if there's globalization efforts. But also, like, I think they face a lot more pressure nowadays from like the fucking rail project and shit. Like the last government was fucking dog shit.
Across Latin America and the world, drawing frequent comparisons to liberation movements in Kurdistan, Palestine, and beyond. Subcomandante Marcos, in particular, became a global sensation as an icon of Latin American revolution, whose suave charisma and warrior poet persona served to elevate the Zapatista movement. His books soon appeared in numerous languages and bookstores around the world, while his masked face soon graced t-shirts and album covers like a new Che Guevara. In November 2023, the EZLN broke their long silence by issuing a series of communiques declaring major changes to their system of autonomy. The old system, criticized for
I think it would be pretty safe statement to say this guy's cooler than Guevara.
Oh yeah, no, he's like the coolest.
You got
I do
nothing on this guy.
I do also like Emiliano Zapata, like the land belongs to the people who work it.
Yeah. Was he the guy with the was he the horse guy or was that Marcos?
I mean, they all have horses, but you're thinking of Marcos is normally always on a horse when you see him with the pipe. But like they had horses. It was the Mexican like revolution, you know?
No, I
It was
know.
World War
I'm thinking
era, so
of a
they were
specific
using horses.
guy. It is
But-
it is Zapata. It was him. Cuz he had the what's the hat called? The big Mexican hat.
The big sombrero.
Is it a sombrero?
Something. Maybe there's
Yeah,
a
no,
specific name for that type of hat.
Yeah, like it's a very specific picture that I'm thinking of, and it was a hat, the big sombrero hat on a horse, looking hard as fuck.
centralizing power and limiting the autonomy of local communities, was replaced by one that aims to decentralize and democratize Zapatista politics. The tenuous situation of the Zapatistas, 30 years from their dramatic uprising in 1994, raises vital questions regarding the
The
future
crazy
of this
part is
unique
that
and
he's a
globally
revolutionary
influential-
that hasn't been shot in the chest and killed.
True.
You know, like that's the real crazy part. Because anyone who is prolific, they don't have the
Kinda lost
time
one.
on Earth as like he has had.
yet vulnerable social movement. To better understand where the Zapatistas are today, and where they might go from here, the modern insurgent dispatched a reporting team to Chiapas to attend the uprising's 30th anniversary. New Year's Day, 1994. This is where it all began. Nestled between the mountains of the central highlands of Chiapas, San Cristobal de las Casas is an unassuming city of cobblestone streets and adobe walls, built in the old colonial style. Today, tourists flock to colonial-era monuments, while indigenous merchants hawk goods in the bustling marketplace. 30 years ago, this city was briefly a battleground. Our team stopped here in the days leading up to the anniversary to speak with experts on the Zapatista uprising, its aftermath, and the status of Zapatista autonomy 30 years later. In the Nabolom archive in San Cristobal, we spoke with historian and archivist Gregorio Vázquez, whose research in the archives and fieldwork with indigenous communities in the Lacandon jungle
Love
has
me
brought
some
him into
papery
close
boxes.
contact with the Zapatistas. Vázquez welcomed us into the archive to provide the historical context behind the uprising using source materials from the time.
Hell yeah.
Estamos en el archivo José Weber. Es un archivo de un educador alemán que llega en los años 40 a San Cristóbal y se establece hasta su muerte en el 83. Uno de los periódicos importantes en San Cristóbal que va a registrar las actividades de las comunidades indígenas antes del EZLN y después del EZLN, después de la aparición pública, es el periódico Tiempo.
I think it was you who said that the Spanish sound like white people trying to speak Spanish. And
Yeah,
I can never
actual people
unhear it
from
now.
Spain.
Yeah, I can never unhear it now. Now all I hear is Americans trying to speak Spanish.
El periódico Tiempo era un periódico formado, fue fundado por Concepción Villafuerte y llamado Avendaño. Personas con una posición política de izquierda que tenían claro cuáles eran como las situaciones que estaban viviendo las comunidades indígenas. Por ejemplo, este es uno de los periódicos que en lo personal creo que explora mucho del avance en la organización de la comunidad indígena. Chiapas, del Congreso Indígena a la Guerra Campesina. El Congreso Indígena se da en 1974, es la primera organización donde los grupos indígenas de Chiapas de diferentes etnias se reúnen para hablar de cuáles son los problemas sociales que están atravesando. A partir de eso en las mismas comunidades se van a ir organizando poco a poco para defender cuestiones de tierra, de educación, de justicia, cuestiones agrarias. Y después se van a recrudecer principalmente los ataques militares y ataques gubernamentales hacia las comunidades organizadas. Entonces creo que este es uno de estos textos que permite entender cómo del 74 al 94 hay 20 años de organización política dentro de los espacios. Los zapatistas siempre han dicho que ellos no quisieron tomar otros personajes como Marx, como Engels, como Stalin, como Lenin. ¿Por qué? Porque esos personajes no eran conocidos por la población campesina ni la población indígena. Zapata era un referente fuerte para la población mexicano, con la gente que se identificaba, y por tanto pues las ideas de Zapata florecieron con más rapidez que pues las mismas concepciones marxistas que se manejaban en el espacio. Las demandas que exige el STLN en
What happened?
Nothing. He said that basically that nobody really cared about the Marxist pamphlets and shit.
That is pretty funny.
Get your Euro ideology out of here.
1994 son las mismas demandas que se estaban estableciendo en 1974 cuando se realiza el Congreso Nacional Indígena, y esas demandas son las mismas demandas que se exigían en 1950 cuando llega el INI, y esas mismas demandas son las que existían en 1934 cuando se crea el primer departamento indígena en el estado. Y esas mismas, pareciera irónico, pero a 2023 son las mismas demandas. Sigue siendo salud, territorio, educación, cultura.
Some still remember clearly the early days of the uprising 30 years later. We spoke with Gaspar Morquecho, a journalist and anthropologist who was one of the first on the scene on the morning of January 1st, 1994. Morquecho recalls speaking with Subcomandante Marcos on the steps of the City Hall of San Cristóbal on that historic day.
Mi nombre es Gaspar Morquecho Camilla, soy antropólogo y de alguna manera le sigo dando seguimiento al movimiento. Pues el evento más importante es, después de la declaración de guerra, 10 días de combate, el gobierno federal decreta el cese al fuego, ¿sí? Y el STLN acepta el cese al fuego. ¿Y qué se va a dar? Se crearon las condiciones para el primer diálogo con el
was
gobierno
such a
federal,
smart
que se va a
spot to
celebrar
interview
aquí en
him.
la Catedral de San Cristóbal de las Casas. Eso fue muy interesante porque el 1 de enero
Great frame.
del 94, frente al Palacio, que fue cuando yo conozco a Marcos, que está por ahí, muy temprano, nada más estábamos él y yo ahí en la plaza, ahí nos conocimos. Y sabía, me presento Gaspar Morquecho de Chiltac, sí, Amado Bendaño, Conchita, el periódico Tiempo, ¿no? Que por aquí anda un ejemplar del periódico. Y dije, ¿y este cabrón de dónde nos conoce? O sea, conocía todo, pues tenía, como jefe militar, tenía muy bien ubicado a varios de los referentes. Y hubo un momento en el que le dije, ¿y van a dialogar? Claro, vamos a dialogar. Entonces yo volteé como diciendo, no te creo. ¿Cómo vas a dialogar si andan acá? Se molestó mucho al dudar yo de su afirmación. Entonces le dije, ¿cómo van a dialogar? y ya muy serio y con otro tono de voz, sacó el arma con esto. Diciendo, con las armas en la mano. Y efectivamente llegan al diálogo, la delegación del ZLN, llegaron con las armas en la mano. O sea, la cuestión simbólica, la cuestión en concreto, y el hecho
What's
de
funny
que
is I was literally thinking
que se
in my head, just like hearing the guy swallow, it'd be like, man, like a room mic might be better than this, and then they fucking cut to using the room mic there. So hang on. I want to do a small constructive, not really criticism and stuff, because when it's somebody speaking a language other than the audience viewing, it is difficult. But like he specifically said, you can see some of these newspapers around. I would have inserted just a B-roll shot, a pan on some of the frames or something like that. But again, it's you generally do want to cut in B-roll for interviews, but when it's somebody speaking a different language and people are reading subtitles, you kind of want people to focus on your subtitles, so any distraction from that is also like a very creative choice.
It's a bit of flair
over
that's
information.
Yeah, it's a bit of flair that's not necessarily needed, but it would be a good B-roll to throw in there. Yeah.
Like that's my fucking like news editing brain, you know.
De lo que planteaban, ¿no?
Our team's time in San Cristobal in the days leading up to the 30th anniversary of the Zapatista uprising provided clear insights into the historical context of Zapatismo.
Their logo is great. It's transparent except for the eyes.
What?
And the changes experienced by the
symbol
movement
in the
over the past 3 decades.
Oh yeah.
To understand the status of the Zapatistas today and where the movement
it's a
might go
vector.
from here, however, we had to get closer to the source. On the eve of the anniversary, we headed to the Caracol of Dolores Hidalgo to attend the commemorations in person, the first public event held in Zapatista territory in several years. Dolores Hidalgo is one of 12 Zapatista Caracoles, a type of interface compound where the Zapatistas hold events and receive outside visitors, who were typically not permitted direct access to Zapatista communities. As our car trundled up the badly worn road to the Caracol, we passed sign after sign announcing our entrance into Zapatista autonomous territory. Here, the people command and the government obeys, read 1, a typical maxim that embodies the movement's principle of popular rule and government accountability. The movement's ubiquitous red star adorned the walls of buildings on which were painted murals depicting Emiliano Zapata standing alongside the masked militants who bear his name. As we pulled into the Caracol itself, hundreds of masked insurgents in the brown and green uniform of the EZLN stood at attention along the roadside, red bandanas neatly tied around their necks. Outside of the large wooden enclosure where the commemoration events were held, a sea of tents extending in all directions showed the huge size of the audience drawn to the remote mountains of Chiapas to show their support for the rebels. Clearly, despite the challenges faced by the Zapatista movement in recent years, it still enjoys considerable outside interest and support. The sounds of various Maya languages mingled with those of Spanish, English, Italian, German, and numerous other languages. The atmosphere resembled a mix of Woodstock and Occupy. Notably, drugs and alcohol were strictly prohibited, as they are within Zapatista territory in general. As the EZLN stated in a communique prior to the anniversary event, this was no party. In the community kitchens, Zapatista community members were hard at work boiling huge pots of soup and coffee. Food and drink were mostly free, illustrating the profitless orientation of Zapatista economics. None of the community members present would consent to an interview. We were informed repeatedly that the Zapatistas themselves were forbidden from speaking to press. We were nonetheless able to observe some of the events put on at the anniversary that shed light on life in Zapatista territory today. Throughout the day of the anniversary, a series of pedagogical theatrical productions paid homage to crucial moments in Zapatista history and demonstrated how their model of autonomy works in practice. One play told the 500-year story of colonialism in Chiapas, beginning with the Spanish conquest and continuing through the Zapatista uprising. Another illustrated how a
Well, that I'm not sure about. John could probably tell you more.
I mean, we just did an interview before this documentary, and we kind
does
of got
go into
into
it.
it there.
A little bit, but you always talk about how you say hate white people, but I think it's just all out.
No, I joke about it. Like, basically, if you're not part of the movement, like, you're not getting in.
Which it makes sense. It's like you can't fault them for it. I want to know what's going on, but I'm not going to force my way in.
Yeah, it's just like, so I'm hoping they open up more. But like, that's why I was like, I point out like the fact that Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman has such good reputation with them is because they're actually like principled.
Yeah,
They
I
don't
imagine that
fucking
they've also
flip and take advantage of things. They're like genuine about.
I imagine that they also help them out when they send people down there, if they send people down there.
Well, they also broadcast. That's the thing is Democracy Now! Is also in Spanish. The co-host does the show in Spanish.
Okay, well that's interesting. Is the best thing about why we did it on YouTube. You can go back and watch it.
Yeah, well, the big thing is opening with that interview meant that as people filtered in, the max amount of people would see the actual documentary.
The actual documentary, yeah. And I posted all the links and stuff. So if go and give the view to them anyway. But obviously we're watching it here.
Zapatista woman might bring a domestic violence case to the autonomous court system.
I'll probably cut
And a third
the.
demonstrated the workings of the
I'll
Zapatista.
download it and cut the interview section off and send it to Modern Insurgent as well.
Okay.
Because we can also repost that and put a tag
Yeah, I
in
already
the YouTube upload. Like in the title, if I put
Yes.
at Modern Insurgent, it will tag them, so then people can look at that
okay.
interview and click the actual tag on the channel and go straight to the documentary.
Yeah, we should also do one of those fancy little link things that actually has the video to click on. So it directs them
QR?
to a QR code.
It
direct
embeds
link,
it
whatever
though.
works.
Like right here where it says 30 years later, there will literally be a link to their page.
Yeah, I mean, like, just so once the interview's done, like, once the interview's finished, they can click off the interview straight to
Okay,
the
I can put a
documentary.
QR code in there.
Okay,
That's
that
the
works.
best I could do. Oh, you can put the fucking analytic links on YouTube as well.
Yeah.
So I
Like,
don't need
you
a
know
QR
how we
code.
do with the playlist
Yeah, yeah.
at the end of the videos?
I think
that
I
kind
can
of
only
thing.
recommend my own videos there.
Ah. Okay, so that's a little bit more complicated. But yeah, QR
Yeah.
code works. I would put a link in the description as well, but I feel like people don't click description links.
Yeah, that's why I'm gonna put it right in the title.
Yeah.
Uprising. Another illustrated how a Zapatista woman might bring a domestic violence case to the autonomous court system. And a third demonstrated the workings of the Zapatista education system. In Chiapas, the Mexican state with the highest literacy rate at nearly 14%, these theatrical performances are an effective way to teach local history and communicate the lessons of Zapatismo. To one side of the theatrical enclosure, Zapatistas sold books and posters bearing art and political slogans. There was even a board game for sale called Autonomía Zapatista, Zapatista Autonomy. The numerous books on
I
sale,
helped fundraise for
many
that
authored
board
by
game to get
Subcomandante.
made.
I want one.
It's
That's
so
great.
like they it's like it's God, I don't remember it at all, but they even made a video about it, but it's more of like an educational game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's to help kids understand the movement and stuff,
Yeah, understand what they're
which I
living
think is really cool. But yeah, I remember the fundraising for the board game.
De Martos, but many others written by academics and journalists, point to the intellectual undercurrent of Zapatismo. Everywhere, masked insurgents in the green and brown uniforms of the EZLN stood a watchful guard over the anniversary event. There were at least several hundred militants in attendance, staying in a separate camp to which visitors were denied access. Many were women, a sign of the central place of women within the Zapatista movement. Estimates have placed the number of women in the EZLN at about 1/3 of all combatants. In a highly patriarchal region
That's
of Mexico,
interesting.
women's rights have always been one of the pillars.
When we're talking about the TPLF, wasn't it also a third of women there?
Possibly.
I want to say it is. Yeah, I think the PKK is also 1/3 women.
Yep, TPLF is approximately 1/3.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. I wonder why it's consistently around the same. PKK is 40%. I wonder why it's so similar around those numbers.
It might have something to do. So you obviously have a 50-50 split on gender. And then kind of if you split it again on that 50, you'll have 25 to 35 there of that percentage, and maybe the half of the women go to more like traditional family roles,
Yeah.
want to have kids and stuff like that, and the other half,
Kill ISIS.
breaks out that way, and it just divides evenly like that, even though it's not quite even because it's not 25%,
Yeah.
but
Of Zapatista politics. One of the threats facing the Zapatistas today is the problem of youth disengagement. 30 years ago, revolutionary optimism was in the air. The partisans of the EZLN were young and full of fervor. Now, the original rebels are older, and the movement consolidated. Zapatista youths, those born after the uprising, are left with the difficult and unglamorous task of maintaining the revolutionary framework that their parents set up. But some, dissatisfied with the limitations and difficulties of life in the Zapatista territories, and attracted by economic
in our
prospects
article that we wrote about child soldiers, a big point of our argument, and it's not like we're arguing for them, we're just arguing against the traditional like image that people have in their heads of what they are. And like a lot of, especially the PKK, like a lot of the girls who join there are like 17, getting out of a forced
escaping.
marriage and stuff. And like some of them have like kids already too.
Like that's crazy.
But then in something like the TPLF, it skews younger because a lot of the like if you're a young girl, there's literally nothing you can do. You're a victim to society unless you join a militant movement, and that's why a lot of these girls were pulled towards the TPLF. And what I was reading in the research anyway.
Yeah, and
which
they
is
were so
linked in
young
there.
too.
Yeah, they did an age bracket. I think like one was like, they said him like 3 years old when joining.
Of mainstream culture and society are abandoning the territory for the cities, challenging the long-term prospects of Zapatista autonomy.
Oh, this is the problem.
At the center of the compound stood a stage where the Comandancia, the clandestine revolutionary leadership of the EZLN, would assemble to speak at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Day 2024. Before they arrived, however, our team spoke with several prominent Zapatista allies present at the anniversary to shed light on the significance of the movement today. In the early years of the Zapatista movement, The EZLN pointedly rejected participation in political processes at the national level. Faced with the history of fraudulent elections and corruption in Mexican politics, and the nature of what the Zapatistas term the bad government of the Mexican state, the EZLN rejected the legitimacy of the formal political process. However, in 2017, during the national
Yeah, the amnesty thing is strange. Like, and that's what John was saying about what we're talking about. Is it's a lot more complicated than people make it out to be.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
a lot of
also,
this is escaping
a big
abuse.
part of the child soldier shit with the YPG is like straight up coming from like Turkish information channels, and Turkey it's like part of Radio Free Europe. Like the access they have, like Amnesty International might be an NGO, but they're susceptible to the same information chains that any person is.
Mhm.
So that's the thing, is that if you're susceptible to information chains, I mean, look at this kid who was just killed in Russia, not in Russia, but he was like a CIA deputy director's kid who is just, there's literally, like, you can see his face on the drone footage. Like, literally,
Drone
it's
footage?
deputy
What are you
director of the
talking
CIA, and he joined the Russian army to fight against Ukrainians.
Seriously?
His son. Yeah. You know
you
what I'm
get
saying?
drone-
Like,
do you
you
get
would think
killed by a
that you would
drone?
think that if you're the son of a deputy CIA director, you kind of would have a blocker against bullshit.
You would think so.
But maybe it's just he really hates his dad. That is photoshopped. That's funny. It's a good Photoshop. If that's the case.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
There's just a picture of him turning around, seeing the drone coming at him. It might be a meme. It's very good Photoshop if that's the case.
I saw a video of a drone thermal filming a Russian trying to shoot it, and all you see is the drone just go boom, and all you see is a thermal cloud and the gun go flying. It's like, oh, you did well there. Congratulations. You'd still be alive if you didn't invade.
National Indigenous Congress, held in San Cristobal de las Casas, the EZLN broke with their record of abstaining from electoral politics by endorsing the first indigenous woman ever to run for president in Mexico, the Nahua traditional healer and human rights advocate Maria de Jesus Patricio Martinez. The affectionately named Marichoy ran as an independent candidate in the 2018 presidential election, losing to Andrés Manuel López Obrador, whom the EZLN has since extensively criticized. Despite her loss of the presidential bid, the EZLN's decision to explicitly endorse Marichoy's run marked a shift in the group's willingness to engage in national politics
something real
on the
quick
electoral
that's
level.
very interesting. So PSL is super into AMLO and Scheinbaum. I have never once encountered one who knows what EZLN or the Zapatistas are. They don't even know what it is.
Seriously?
It's like you would think these principled communists would be aware of them.
Crazy. Talking about PSL, I sent you a post, and it turns out you're already following them. The account is former PSL member.
Uh-huh.
I'm kind of curious. I
mean, you
know
can
more.
just send them a message.
I fucking will. But they, this post that they made, talking about
And I'll just send them I'll send them a sup right now.
dangerous and authoritarian history of sexual abuse and assault within PSL.
Yeah, they're just a little page. Only 200 followers.
Yeah, and then
They send them a sup.
the other thing that I thought was funny is I was looking through the comments and people were saying zine. I'm like, since you fucking said it, it's popping up now.
I told you, bro.
And they're like, why are you giving out zines at protests? It's like, brother, it's about sexual assault. What are you talking about?
We caught up with Marichoy at the anniversary,
This is literally what
where she
people
told me
should
how the
be
Zapatistas
doing.
are a model point of reference for all indigenous Mexicans in their pursuit of autonomy and justice nationwide.
Mi nombre es María de Jesús Patricio. Soy concejal, miembro del Congreso Nacional Indígena de un pueblo náhuatl del sur de Jalisco. y pues más bien el acercamiento, la relación es a través como pueblos que somos y que como acá también hay pueblos, entonces pues se convoca una asamblea por ahí en el 1995, una asamblea nacional indígena convocada por nuestros hermanos zapatistas, y es como nos damos cita los diferentes pueblos a nivel nacional, y de ahí empieza una nueva relación entre pueblos que se concentran a ese llamado que nos hacen. Entonces, de ahí se da lo de el pensar, bueno, si somos pueblos, somos hermanos, tenemos los mismos problemas en los diferentes lugares de donde venimos, pues yo creo que es bueno tener un espacio propio como pueblos. Y entonces se fue pensando y se fue construyendo lo que dio origen a lo que es el Congreso Nacional Indígena. Es un espacio que surge a raíz de ese llamamiento, y entonces pues de ahí hasta ahorita pues ya tenemos 27 años de conformados. Entonces esa es la relación que ha habido, ¿verdad? Como pueblos, como hermanos, y la situación que se vive pues en cada pueblo de despojo y también de violencia que últimamente se está viviendo, ¿verdad? Entonces, pues, es eso, pues, ¿no?
See, there's B-roll cuts in the middle of the interview.
Cuando se participó en este proceso electoral 2017-2018, fue una, ¿cómo les quiero explicar? Como un sacudir a México, ¿verdad? Como un llamado de que no está la solución a los problemas o a través de unas urnas o de un partido, sino que tenemos que buscar otras formas organizativas, y no es a través de las elecciones. Era como esos dos objetivos, como que volteáramos a ver que si no hay organización, quede quien quede, la situación va a seguir igual. Y la organización abajo, ¿verdad? En los pueblos real, porque no es organizarse para unas elecciones o para estar en el poder, sino cómo vamos construyendo desde abajo otra forma que no cabe en las urnas, como decían nuestros hermanos. Entonces fue así como un sacudir, como que voltearan a ver que los pueblos están siendo masacrados, acabados, y que los de arriba no voltean a ver eso. Solamente los utilizan para tener los votos. Alguien decía, es que nos vamos a meter a la fiesta de los ricos, ¿verdad? Y para echarles a perder su fiesta, ¿verdad?
That sounded based.
Y vamos a meter a la fiesta
Go and crash the rich people's party.
de los ricos, ¿verdad? Y para echarles a perder su fiesta, ¿no? Entonces era usar sus mismas herramientas, pero para hacer visible que todo eso nada más lo usan, pero para favorecer un equipo, un grupo. Un ejemplo pues son lo que están haciendo nuestros hermanos en este proceso, pues los pueblos que tienen sus propias formas de tomar decisión, y que a veces son por los programas de gobierno, pues los lesionan por los megaproyectos. Entonces es como retomar esa organización propia que se tiene en los pueblos, que ha sido lesionada. Pues como decimos en los pueblos, la libre determinación de decir, aquí en la comunidad, como es mi tierra, es mi gente, es mi costumbre, yo aquí decido qué se hace, ¿verdad? Es tomar en cuenta a la asamblea, la decisión de la asamblea, y si se equivoca, pues se equivocó todos, pues.
Marichoy was not the only indigenous activist present at the anniversary whom we spoke with. We also met with two Otomi delegates from the CNI, Isabel Valencia and Sara Hernandez Jimenez, who told us what Zapatista autonomy means to them.
A partir de que ellos llegan a decir que nos conquistaron, ¿no? Desde hace 531 años ellos manejan, llegamos y conquistamos México, conquistamos a los pueblos y hoy estamos aquí para decirle pues que mintieron. No fue una conquista, fue una masacre, fue un saqueo, se llevaron todo lo que teníamos los pueblos originarios en riqueza y aún lo siguen haciendo. Es un saqueo que no ha terminado, que en su momento fue oro, fue todo lo que teníamos como tangible y hoy hay este oro que uno no lo puede ver, no lo puede percibir porque está en las montañas, porque es el agua, porque es el bosque. Y todo eso es lo que estamos
like the current like global liberalism credit for is at least they do this shit indirectly now. You can't just go in and shoot people in the head and take their gold. I mean, you can if you're Wagner, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not... This era is, like, dead. Of, you look at, like, 200 years ago...
Colonial conquest.
You know? I mean, just look what happened to Geronimo.
Mm.
He was based as fuck. They captured him, like, 3 times. Every time he escaped, formed a militia, and started attacking the colonialist. Literally, awesome. Literally, by our definition, would be a political terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
Defendiendo esa parte de que en su momento dijeron fue conquista y los conquistamos y le quitamos todo, pero no es así. Entonces esa lucha es la que se viene haciendo y fue precisamente como esa lanza que se hizo en su momento hace 30 años, que ahorita se está festejando, pero antes de los 30 años empezaron 10
and also
años
just
antes.
To touch on that too,
Son
like
40.
I've talked about it multiple times, but like the democratic models throughout the New World, a lot of it actually does come from the Mayan trade caravan route. That's why corn is all the way in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Is because of Mayans' trade logistics and stuff. Like the Three Sisters is like planting method is all throughout the region. But the thing is, it's like there's this whole thing that the conservatards will say, be like, well, they fought each other and enslaved each other before the white people got there. And like, okay, it's fine to fight. You can fight over land and shit. In fact, these people are fighting over their land still.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's like to take away a complete like autonomy from entire groups of people. Like, that's the issue. Like, it's only today that we're actually seeing a lot of progress and movement start to happen where this autonomy is returning to people, where like we're having like historic land reclamations and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. Like, it's great. More.
Yeah, that's why I'll defend the liberal world order. It might be destroying the world, but I think we would be destroying it a lot faster.
Y de decir que sí podemos resistir, sí podemos luchar contra la muerte, ¿no? Porque la muerte es el capitalismo que llega disfrazado de progreso, disfrazado de trabajo, que es lo que nos han dicho, que si viene una empresa vamos a tener mucho trabajo y los pueblos sabemos que no es así. Los pueblos sabemos que ese trabajo
better than a fucking gun. Like, it's just a gun dressed up as the friendly grandma.
Yeah. Like, it's hard because you're not going to stop it. So how do you fight against it? Like, it's...
Well, I think that's the thing is that with capitalism is that because it's literally like a Satan, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a fucking Melchiora. It's like in disguise. It's the whole point of like demons is like they offer you good things.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. Is like the fucking modern horror movie depiction of what these things were, these lessons in mythos that exist throughout cultures. they're never like just these pure evil things that like are obsessed with like getting you and torturing your soul and stuff. They have like
Yeah.
ulterior motives to gain things, and they offer you things in return. But it's literally just like capitalism as she's describing, where the demon is offering you something small, but it's gaining something much greater from you that you don't realize. You know, like you just want to trade your hands to the devil so you can play your hollow flute for your girlfriend.
We traded Mars for a bead.
Is that also in Futurama?
Yes. It's a massive diamond.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Ser por poco
And they're like, nah, fuck you, keep it.
tiempo y al final de
That's also a
cuentas
myth. That
tu
never
parcela
happened.
donde
The
se
whole like
No, I
trading
know.
Manhattan for a bead.
Is that where it comes from?
Yes.
No shit. I didn't know that that was the actual origin of that joke. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a literal fucking colonialist. How stupid these people are. They didn't know the value. It's literally taught to you in school. Like I learned it in school
Crazy.
in 5th grade, 4th grade.
They just straight
Where
up
they
teaching
they
you
literally
lies.
like just teaching you, haha, look at how dumb these people are. That's not what happened. It's literally not what happened at all. It's part of the modern American history myth. So for one thing, the people they were trying to get the land from were like, what do you mean own the land?
Yeah, they didn't have the concept of it, right?
Yeah. Because the demon of capitalism wasn't there. Even then it was, you know.
Evidence later suggests the Dutch actually brought Manhattan from the wrong tribe.
Yeah, who's the dumbass now? Who's the dumbass now, bro? The white people.
That's fucking great. Was Manhattan really sold for $24 worth of beads? Obscured facts. Sand down the river. Indian emissary of the Dutch. Dispersed Asia, Dutch West Indies. Landscape ecologist. Okay. Where's the evidence? First known mention of this historic sale comes from a 1626 letter penned by a Dutch merchant who wrote that a man named Peter Minuit had purchased Manhattan for 60 guilders, the Dutch currency at the time. Fits within crucial period in New York's history. Nothing about beads. It's very interesting.
sembrabas ya no vas a poder sembrar. ¿Por qué? Porque ya va a haber un hotel ahí.
It also
porque ya,
goes into
ya va a
just
haber un
shaming their currency and their concept of currency and money. Like, oh, they trade seashells? It's not even backed by gold or a central government. Shut
Those
up.
contain no details of the individuals involved in the sale, nor the precise date of the exchange. So it's literal Chinese whispers.
It's literal part of the modern American history myth. It's literally taught to us to help dehumanize these people.
Yeah. The value has been warped through time in misrepresentation into $24. That figure was taken from a history book published in 1846 and somehow remained unchanged since then. Adjusted
What do you think else
present-day
happened
value.
in 1846?
1846. Civil War? It's the Mexican-American War.
Oh, that's a great one, huh?
Damn.
Talk about buying things for beads. That's literally what they tried to do there, and then said, "Oh, you won't take the beads?"
War. Yeah. Crazy.
Starbucks, porque ya va a haber un centro comercial y eso es lo que ellos llaman progreso, es lo que ellos llaman trabajo hacia las comunidades y hacia los pueblos. Y hoy en día hemos entendido y sabemos que todo lo que nos dicen es mentira, ¿no? Entonces, para nosotros es una inspiración la lucha zapatista porque sabemos que juntos se puede lograr lo que el Estado dice que no es posible. Ajá. Parar megaproyectos, liberar a nuestros detenidos, que presenten a nuestros desaparecidos, algunos, ¿verdad? Con esa presión de todos los pueblos, de mucha gente consciente. Pues más bien somos como una red, ¿no? Entonces, en donde nos dañan a uno tenemos que responder todos. Y pues más bien nosotros decimos que ellos son nuestros hermanos mayores que nos enseñan un camino más adelantado y rutas por donde nosotros podemos seguir de acuerdo a nuestros contextos, nuestros tiempos y pues a nuestras posibilidades también. Por eso es esta lucha en conjunta de todos los pueblos y por eso hoy estamos aquí festejando, porque esta lucha es para todos y para todas, porque también es a nivel mundial ya no es México, ya no es Europa, ya no es en otra parte del mundo. Definitivamente yo creo que muchas hermanas y hermanos estaban como dormidos y hoy están despertando y hoy están diciendo y están defendiendo la tierra, ¿no? Al estar aquí en esta fiesta que se está celebrando hoy, al cumplirse 30 años y 40 años, se puede decir, de una lucha tan fuerte. Entonces, también los pueblos hemos dicho que si tienes tu historia no estás muerto, ¿no? Sin historia sí estás muerto. Entonces, los pueblos tenemos nuestra historia. Pues más bien es una referencia para toda la humanidad, porque recordemos que si no hay naturaleza no hay vida, si no hay árboles no hay oxígeno, si no hay agua no hay vida. Entonces es un referente de vida para toda la humanidad y una fuerza, nosotros decimos, es un escudo de esta destrucción fatal que es para todos, no nada más para zapatistas o no zapatistas, sino que es esta destrucción capitalista es, como ellos dicen, de muerte y es para todos.
It's crazy because like
After
you hear
speaking
people
with the
like this
CNI
talk about capitalism and not feel annoyed because they're not seeing things like the bourgeoisie and other
Yeah.
things about how Lenin is based.
It's almost like it's grounded in reality.
Representatives, we stepped back while the festivities continued throughout the day and into the night. Finally, nearing midnight, the formal anniversary ceremony began. One by one, the uniformed militants of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation filed out of their camp and into the two main enclosures of the Caracol. Since the
Follow our
90s,
goal,
the
Matt.
EZLN has seldom been seen with real weapons, preferring wooden substitutes. However,
It's too
the
bad it
rifles they
didn't
carried in
play the
1994 are
sparkles
still
on
sequestered in the jungle,
the Twitch screen.
ready.
It played them for me on my dashboard though.
Weird.
But it was like it was all sparkly. A little banner went across on the dashboard.
Great. Thanks, Twitch.
In case they should ever be needed again. Although the display of several hundred insurgents marching in unison seemed impressive enough to our team, we were told that this was only a small portion of the entire EZLN army, which is never present in its entirety on any single occasion. As the militants put on their martial display, the Comandancia arrived under escort and took their seats on the central stage. In a symbolic move typical of Zapatista theatrics, the first row of seats on the stage consisted of empty chairs,
See the little kid.
each marked with text
Yeah.
representing an absent demographic. The disappeared, the murdered, political prisoners, and the
Interesting.
casualties of more than 500 years
This
of
is like,
colonialism, among others.
So
The Zapatistas
the big fucking protests in Mexico against the femicide, the government literally put up a wall around the government building to protect them from their people,
Amazing.
right? I mean, we have a fence around the White House as well, but you can like pretty much walk into Congress.
Can walk right up the steps.
Oh, you can go inside.
I think it was
If
closed
Congress
when I
is in session, they won't open the doors and let you in there. But yeah, like you can go right in. But like they wrote all the names of the victims on the walls all around the palace.
Damn. That's a statement. That's a good one.
Zapatistas have not forgotten the martyrs of their struggle. As the music died down and the insurgent army stood at attention, Subcomandante Moises, the successor of Subcomandante Marcos as the head spokesperson of the EZLN, took his place at the podium to address the thousands gathered there from across Chiapas, Mexico, and the whole world. Subcomandante Moises, an indigenous Tzeltal militant who was one of the original leaders of the Zapatista movement, first delivered his 20-minute speech in his native language, before repeating it in Spanish.
Compañeros, compañeras, están viendo, ahí está, las sillas de los ausentes y ausentas. ¿No están?
Did Marcos step down? What?
Yeah, they
He's
don't
not dead,
believe
is he?
in holding power.
Okay. So he just
So they-
passed the torch.
Yeah. They actually I believe they held an election. You know, I mean, it's the same with Scheinbaum. Like, it was an election, but she was being handed the
Yeah.
throne. You know, so to speak.
But yeah, because
Like, nobody had a
think...
chance except her. It was whoever AMLO picked, and it was obviously going to be her. You know.
Yeah. I mean, for
And
these
also,
guys, it makes sense.
he's
to
a
pick guy.
subcommandante, so Marcos was never the leader either. There isn't technically a leader, but there's commandantes above. I believe there's 3 commandantes above the
Okay.
subcommandantes, but I don't know.
But they're just the spokesperson.
They do more than that, but this guy specifically, this subcommandante, is the spokesperson, and before that, Marcos was the spokesperson, even when he was not subcommandante, I believe.
Las madres y los padres buscadoras. No están las desaparecidas y desaparecidos. No están las presas políticas y presos políticos. No están las asesinadas y asesinados. No están los jóvenes y jóvenes asesinados, asesinadas.
Are they linked arms, or are they holding something together?
Well, they all have. So this is the common thing that the militia carry are these sticks, right? It's like a shillelagh, you know. It's like very symbolic. It's not only just like. It's more than just a stick for fighting, you know? It's got a lot of history and symbolism behind it. So that's what you're seeing. It's like they're linked arms, but they're all holding the sticks as well.
Ah.
No están las niñas y los niños asesinados. También no están nuestros tatarabuelos, los que lucharon hace más de 500 años. Pero también no están nuestros compañeros caídos que ya lo cumplieron su deber. La propiedad debe de ser del pueblo y común. Y el pueblo se tiene que gobernarse en sí mismo. No necesitamos esos que están ahí. Ellos creen que saben todo. Deciden por los maestros, deciden por los doctores, deciden por todos los sectores de trabajadores. Como quien dice que son sabelotodo. Son sabelotodo porque ahí ganan dinero sin trabajar, sin sudar. No. Por eso el pueblo es la que tiene que saber gobernarse.
As Subcomandante Moises finished his speech, the clock struck midnight, marking 30 years from the beginning of the experiment in indigenous autonomy that the EZLN launched in 1994. Fireworks exploded above, cheers rose up from the crowd, and a party began that would outlast the night. Back in Mexico City, we met with Pedro Valtierra, a prominent photojournalist who shot some of the most emblematic photos of the Zapatista uprising and its aftermath. In his office, he showed us a famous photograph taken in the highlands of Chiapas in 1998, capturing Zapatista women confronting the soldiers occupying their land.
Mi relación con los zapatistas es que, bueno, como periodista estuve cubriendo el levantamiento y antes había estado trabajando mucho en la región de Chiapas, todas sus comunidades, sus grupos. Bueno, llegué, como te decía, en el 94, el día 3 de enero, como muchos periodistas que nos dimos cuenta y nos enteramos del levantamiento, estábamos ahí ya desde el día 3, para retratar todo el levantamiento, todo lo que tenía que ver. Yo me di a la tarea de buscarlos, de tratar de hacer algunas cosas exclusivas o especiales, ¿no? Lanzándome a la selva con pocos recursos y solo, ¿no? Me sorprendió mucho ver el levantamiento. Yo había estado, como te digo, en otros levantamientos, en otras luchas, en otras historias, en El Salvador, en Centroamérica, y nunca me imaginé que nosotros fuéramos a tener un levantamiento con esas características, ¿no? Nunca imaginé que en México fuera a pasar eso. Sabía que en Chiapas la situación económica es complicada, la marginación de la mayor parte de la población, ¿no? Que tienen condiciones económicas sumamente débiles, pero yo no imaginé que iba a haber en Chiapas lo que antes había visto en Guatemala o en Nicaragua, en El Salvador, ¿no? Nunca me lo imaginé, fue sorpresa. Creo que madurar en su idea, en su propuesta política, se han ido, me parece, hasta donde yo puedo entender, logrando los objetivos que se plantearon, con toda la limitación que tienen por parte del Estado, por las condiciones económicas, por las condiciones sociales y por el entorno. Pienso que es difícil. Sin embargo, creo que han tenido avances sustanciales en cuanto a que, por otro lado, pues son autónomos del Estado, mantienen una disciplina social importante.
We've got 6 minutes left. Then we can talk.
Lo que les permite darle una organización diferente a la que existe en otras comunidades, ¿no? Es una fotografía que me tocó tomar el día 3 de enero del 98. Estaba muy reciente la matanza de Acteal. Un grupo de paramilitares había matado a 46 personas, mujeres, niños, señores, ancianos, y los había masacrado prácticamente. Mató a 46, pero 4 mujeres de esas 46 estaban embarazadas y también les abrieron el vientre y mataron al bebé. Esas personas que habían sido asesinadas por unos paramilitares huyeron a un campamento que se llamaba Soyep, y cuando se da la matanza yo estoy en Chiapas y luego vamos con el reportero de la jornada, Juan Balboa. Llegamos y la gente en ese momento se estaba organizando para protestar por la presencia del ejército. El ejército había llegado un día antes a cuidarlos al campamento, a cuidarlos según ellos, y las mujeres reclamaron, las mujeres y los hombres reclamaban la presencia del ejército ahí y les pedían que se fueran. Hicieron una manifestación y fueron y les dijeron que se fueran, y finalmente el ambiente se fue poniendo tenso, las mujeres cada vez se fueron acercando más a los soldados, llegó un momento en que los empujaban, en que los golpeaban, pidiéndoles que se fueran. Y a esa foto, que es una fotografía que se ha vuelto muy famosa, de las
That would be
mujeres
the
cuando
moment
están
that the US
empujando,
forces
agarrándolo,
would
así,
shoot you.
empujándolo es.
Yes, it would.
Yo estaba tomando fotos ahí y bueno, me tocó verlo y tomar la foto y esa es la historia de la fotografía, ¿no?
Returning to San Cristobal after spending several days in Zapatista autonomous territory was like moving between worlds. In a very real sense, the Zapatistas do not live in Mexico. In fact, in his anniversary speech, Subcomandante Moises referred to outside visitors from other parts of Mexico as foreigners. The Zapatistas see themselves as radically other in relation to mainstream Mexican society. Their mountain strongholds in the highlands of Chiapas are bastions of radical autonomy, which the Mexican state and neoliberal capitalism have not been able to penetrate.
Yeah, fuck Whitey.
And after 30 years, their autonomy still holds strong, though mounting dangers present ever greater challenges to their future. Recent years have brought the Mexican drug war to Chiapas, threatening communities caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, extractive industries and infrastructure development projects like the Tren Maya
Those
threaten the social and
colored
ecological
flags that
integrity
you see
of the
places, it's so funny that that type of thing is so common, and like it even is in like European culture because of ships.
Okay.
So they mean much different things, but like it's a huge Buddhist thing with the colored flags. They'll put the mantras on them and stuff. Like if you actually look at like Everest
like
and
a
the peak
rainbow
and
flag.
stuff, it's covered in these flags, these little colored flags. But in the Middle East, you'll see them as well. They're obviously not Buddhist there.
Like single block colors.
Yeah, go back. You'll see them on the street there in that street shot.
surrounding projects like the. Meanwhile,
On the
Yeah.
over the street.
Like
yeah.
these little decorative flags, but they just basically all look the same. You know, there's minor differences between it, but it's in so many places all over the world, that specific thing. I guess most homes are
extractive
square too,
industries
aren't
and
they?
I think so.
So
infrastructure development projects like the Tren Maya threaten the social and ecological integrity of the surrounding region in the name of economic development. The challenge of the Zapatistas today is to navigate a viable course through the choppy
but
waters
I
of the
thought the
present,
government was super
resisting
based in
external
socialist.
pressures without sacrificing their revolutionary
Sounds like
principles.
capitalism to me. It sounds like the
Chiapas
capitalism she
remains
was
Mexico's
just
poorest
announcing.
state.
You know, she was just saying that. Wow, it's almost like these people who say that the rail infrastructure is actually uplifting people are just capitalists.
Crazy.
And the Zapatista communities remain poor and disadvantaged even by local standards. But they continue to show that they would rather be poor and free than return to the miserable and undignified circumstances under which they lived before the rebellion of 1994.
It's better.
They
I
have
don't
made
know
the
if
most of
Zapata
their
actually
hard-won
said this.
freedom,
It might be a
establishing
misattributed quote, but it's
The knees and feet stain.
better to die on your feet than on your knees.
Really?
I
didn't know
think
that
it's him, but
was
it might be
attributed to him.
misattributed. And it might have been something that it was just his version of a common saying.
Yeah. Because there's a line in a Rise Against song where it's like.
Yeah, where do you
talking
think
to
they got it from?
Yeah, no, I know. No, I figured as much, but like it's a really interesting line in the song because they say, it's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And he goes, no, you've got it backwards. I think it's this. It's better
It's
to...
a sex entendre.
No. Let me... The song is Survivor's Guilt.
Okay, not relevant.
I'll have to find it, but
It doesn't matter. Not relevant.
no. I'll save that. Did you look up who that was attributed to?
It's attributed to him in this one random binary quote thing. You know?
Alrighty then.
Like it's So, and right here, Oxford reference attributed to Mexican revolutionary leader Emiliano Zapata.
There you go.
So,
I guess we can attribute it to him. Cool. That's neat.
Unique and lasting tradition of autonomy that continues to bear relevance for the indigenous peoples of Mexico, Latin America, and beyond. From the mountains of the Mexican southeast, amid festive music and dance, a cry of resistance went up for the world to hear. Zapata vive, la lucha sigue. Zapata lives, and the fight continues.
Oh. That's where La Lucha Sigue comes from. Makes sense.
oh, Anton did the editing. That's this guy right here, or girl, audio engineer. That's the underrated goat right here. Oh, so see, facilitating the voiceover, so they probably rented a studio to actually do the recording as well. Smart. It's very smart.
This place seems cool.
Yeah, I want to go so bad, bro.
Like, this is the...
Like, even, like, when I started doing a little bit of the cartels, it wasn't really exactly cartel coverage, but just anything that was over the border coverage. It was like, part of it was just to be able to, like, get experience in Mexico to get the connections.
Yeah.
But, like, the thing is that none of those connections I tried to form, those trains don't lead down to Chiapas. Those people are just, don't even know what it is.
That's true.
They're just so, literal Vice reporting. That's all they care about. The gonzo shit. They don't fucking lead to actual roots into the movement.
Vice has a 20 years video in a similar vein just 10 years ago. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, venture capitalist. So,
he said the initial thing says, die on your feet to live on your knees. Is that the quote?
No, it is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Except it's in Spanish. Or it might not even, he might not have even spoke Spanish. I'd have to check. I think he spoke Spanish. But look, did you see? China just launched this rocket into space. And the first thing I saw, okay, let me know if you see the same thing I see in this video.
Well, that doesn't look
Just,
good.
Don't breathe this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the rocket is supposed to fart noxious fumes before it ignites,
Boy. Rockets are so cool. Fuck yeah. Love me some environmental degradation. Does it crash?
No, it was a successful launch. He says here China just sent 3 astronauts to its space station, in which another 3 Chinese are waiting for their arrival. Soon, it won't be long until we send astronauts to the moon. I mean, none of that is exactly wrong. It just depends on how you define long. But they've already fucking put craft on the moon. They have the capability.
Yeah. They're also reflecting shit from the dark side of the moon too, which is kind of cool. Like, they've got a setup so that they can communicate from the dark side of the moon, which is really cool. Like, all my criticism of China, I'm not gonna poo-poo them when they do something cool. That's cool, minus the fart gas.
Toxic orange gas.
You know, China has a reputation for using banned carcinogenic fuels for their rockets. So, yeah. Also, Ukraine cleaning house. What?
I'm gonna end and restart YouTube so it clips at the documentary there.